All right. So we're going to get started because I know I want to be very respectful of everyone's time. Just to introduce myself, my name is Chris Weissepek. I'm the Executive Director for Admissions Outreach and Recruitment here at Western New England University. And what I'm going to do for you today is just give you a nice broad overview of really how the financial aid process works for many institutions. This is not going to be New England University specific. I may use us as an example. I may use another institution as an example as well. But it's really to give you the breakdown of how everything truly works and what, as parents, you really need to be aware of when going through this process. Now, one thing you're going to hear, and it's the same thing that we talk about when we go over the admissions process, is a lot of it's going to be, it depends. It depends on your family situation. Everyone has a different scenario as far as their expected family contribution, their family background, their employment background. So there's so much that goes into it. And it's almost the same exact way the admissions process works. So I'm hoping this will give you some tips of what to work for. One thing you're going to get from me is I'm very transparent. I know usually I'll give you what the traditional answer is, but then I may also give you the transparent answer at the same time. So we'll get started. And at any point in time, if you have any questions, I have my chat function open. You can feel free to answer there. I definitely like the questions and the engagement because you may have a certain question that is going to be important that someone else maybe didn't want to answer or didn't would probably remember later on that, oh, I should have asked that question. I will stick behind because some of you may have a little bit more one-on-one personal questions. So when that happens, I will stop the recording so I can answer them more directly. But like I said, at any point in time, feel free to let me know if you have any questions. So here's the agenda for this evening. Depends on how fast I go. Like this can range from 30 minutes to an hour. It depends. Everyone that saw me at Hampton Charter recently knows I can talk. But we're going to talk as far as how everything truly works between the FAFSA, the FSAID, submitting it, have a clear understanding what the award package is going to look like and the next steps from there. And then there is some additional information that I'd like to point out that could be helpful when the time comes when you receive your financial aid award letter. Now, what is the FAFSA? So the FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. You will see right here, studentaid.gov is the website where you will go and you fill out the FAFSA. If you go to any other website where they're actually going to be charging you, you need to walk away from that website. Do not share any additional information because it is a free application. If you're being charged, that means you're being scammed. And really the FAFSA focuses a lot on the demographic and financial information. What I mean by that is the demographic is, be honest, like when they incorporate travel expenses and so forth, like a student from California might get a different package compared to a student in New York. And then the financial information, how that really breaks down. When the FAFSA is submitted, every single college and university will come with this, what they call the expected family contribution, or what you're going to hear the EFC. This is a government-based number that comes out with. So the institution is not the one that comes up with this number. How each student package, how each school packages will all depend on that particular institution, but they're still going to use the exact same number, that exact same contribution in order to award a financial aid package. Now, when you hear EFC, when you hear financial aid, keep in mind that's going to be based on need-based aid. And we're going to talk the difference between merit-based and need-based in a little bit. The FAFSA is available in English and Spanish. You must apply for the FAFSA every single year. So it's not a one and done. So if you're applying for fall 22 as an incoming student for whatever college or university you're considering, the following year, you're going to have to apply again. Now, the FAFSA application is open now. So any student that's currently a senior can log on to studentaid.gov and start filling out the FAFSA form. I usually do recommend every single family to start applying early for a few reasons. One, you can get out of the way. Second, if there's any issues with the FAFSA, you can take care of it early on in the process. There's many times when I get students that will submit the FAFSA in like March or April, and there's usually an issue or there's additional information that needs provided that could end up taking longer, because sometimes if you get a data verification, you might have to provide additional documentation, which sometimes you might have to get it from one of the government officials, which that could take weeks on end. So it's always nice to actually start the process early. So this way you have a better idea if you need to provide that information, or just in general to see what type of package that you're going to be offered. And also the big thing is to keep in mind is every single college and university by law has to use prior data, which means if anyone's applying for fall 22, we're going to be looking at 2020 taxes. If you're applying for fall 2023, we're looking at fall 2021. Now, there will be situations where you're sitting here now. Granted, we all know how 2020 turned out to be with the pandemic, but who knows if 2021 was a more challenging year. We're going to talk about a little bit later how that would work in the financial aid process. So that's the FAFSA. Now, before you can do the FAFSA, though, you need to obtain an FSA ID. Now, the FSA ID is your electronic signature, all right? So this is going to be used for the FAFSA. This is something that sticks with you for the rest of your life. So if we have parents on here and you already had a son or daughter that went through college where you had to submit the FAFSA, you already have your FSA ID. Now, the student itself would have to obtain their FSA ID. And my recommendation is please write down what your user ID and password is, because if you forget it, it takes a while for it to get reset. And I've had many situations where we've had someone call studentaid.gov to have their FSA ID reset, and they ask a bunch of this information. So even what you set as your questions, if you ever have to reset the password, write them all down. All right, you really want to write it down. The important thing with the FSA ID too is whatever information shows up on your Social Security card needs to be the information that you put on the FAFSA. Not only on the FAFSA, but also on your college application. The Social Security number is the unique identifier that a lot of colleges and universities use in order to match up the information in their system with the information in the government system when they're pulling in the FAFSA. So for example, if you have a hyphenated last name, you want to make sure you put the full hyphenated name. If you have a different first name, like a legal name, and then what the name you go by, you want to make sure you put the legal name. All right. Here's a good example. I have a friend of mine that graduated from Western New England. His legal name was John and Curtis. So on his FAFSA, he put Curtis. He never got a financial aid package. It took a while before they realized that his legal name was John. So whatever legal name, whatever spelling, if you have a apostrophe in it, anything, you really want to make sure you put the exact same name that shows up on the Social Security card. At least the student has to gain the FSA ID, and at least one parent needs to get an FSA ID, all right? If you have parents right now that are together, that are married, you do not need an FSA ID for both parents. You only need one for one parent. If you have a divorce situation or a separation, same thing, only one parent needs to obtain an FSA ID. So the student and the parent will have their own. But when you're getting your FSA ID, you need to make sure both the student and the parent has separate phone numbers and emails. It cannot be the same phone number. It cannot be the same email. I know sometimes I get a lot of parents that like to put their information within the student's record because they want to make sure they're being informed. Do not do that with the FSA ID. Make sure you have at least that unique phone number that is separate, the unique email that is separate from each of yours. Also, they recommend putting in a cell phone number because this is where text messages can be sent, especially if you have to reset a password or they have to send you a code to verify that it's you on there. So you want to make sure that a cell phone is the preferred method of contact. I mentioned this earlier. You want to make sure you list your Social Security number on the application. That's very, very important. Students, you're really going to know what your Social Security number is. All right. That's going to help you out throughout your 4 years in college. But like I said, that's the unique identifier that is used in order to match up the FAFSA with the in the system. Now, finally, one of the things with the financial aid process is going back to what I was saying earlier. I get a lot of students that forget the information. You really want to make sure you write it down somewhere because it's going to stay with you. If you plan to go on to graduate school, that's the same FSA ID that you're going to be using as your electronic signature. So now that FSA ID can be obtained at any point in time. So if I have any juniors or sophomores on here, technically a junior can get their FSA ID right now. Can't use it until next year because you can't apply until after October 1st, but you can obtain that FSA ID at this point in time. All right, so next, there is a mobile app. To be honest, you can see it right here. They have the agreements. You can get your estimation and submission. Feel free to download the app. I know a lot of students are doing it, but I know me personally, I like the computer, or some likes to still do the old fashioned. Believe it or not, you can still print it out and do it old fashioned. I don't recommend that, but there is a mobile app. The one positive thing about the mobile app that I do like is you can check on the status of your FAFSA, which is nice. So you can see if it's submitted, but you can also see if the school received it. So, which is important because if you're sitting here and you apply for your FAFSA now, you're accepted from an institution in like November, December, but March comes around, you still have not received your financial information. There is an issue. You really want to make sure you call that institution, but you can also use that app to check to see if you are missing anything. So part of the financial aid process. So when you fill out the FAFSA, they're going to have a lot of the demographic information that they're going to look for. They're also going to look in there, see how many students are in college, how many a family is in your household, your assets, and so forth. But there is a section on the FAFSA where they call it the IRS data retrieval tool, or what you're going to be hearing DRT. This is important to use because some colleges will require you to do the data retrieval tool. Some do not. But one of the reasons why a lot of the colleges prefer using the IRS data retrieval tool, because it actually authenticates your identity. So it actually transfers your information from your tax returns into the financial aid, the FAFSA. And that means it leaves less room for mistakes. It leaves a less of a chance to have a data verification. So if for some reason that you're unable, because there are situations where someone is unable to use the IRS data retrieval tool. A good example is identity theft. When someone is a victim of identity theft, most likely you will not be able to use the IRS data retrieval tool. So what you would have to do is contact the IRS and actually have your tax transcripts sent. And the reason why I mentioned this, or going back earlier to saying the sooner you start this, the better, is because it can take weeks for the IRS to send that information. All right. Even from this past year with COVID and the pandemic, it took a little bit longer. And honestly, we don't foresee that time frame shortening up. So that's one of the reasons why you really want to make sure that you take the time, start the FAFSA, do the IRS data retrieval tool. It has less mistakes. There will be certain questions you will be asked after you do the data retrieval tool. And it's just to basically finish up what they're asking for in the FAFSA. So that's usually like the second to last thing that families need to do when filling out the FAFSA. Now, submitting the FAFSA. So the signature is required by one student, one parent. That goes back to that FSA ID. Now, as far as a single parent and divorce situation. So basically, if you're a single parent or you're separated or divorced, well, as a separation, you're technically still legally married. So you actually have to put both parents. But in this situation, the financial aid response is whoever has primary custodialship, so more than 50% custodialship, is the person that you're supposed to be using on the FAFSA. There are situations, though, where I know I've sat with students, most financial aid offices will not do a follow-up, they will not check. It's usually based on the honor system. So I always say, if you have both parents that are involved with the process and you have even custody, put down the parent that makes less money, all right? Because then the financial aid would be based on that, because it goes back, you only need one parent. If you have one parent that is not involved, as a divorce situation or a single parent, and let's say mom or dad is not involved, but only other, you don't need the other parent information, all right? You only need the primary custodialship, all right? Because whoever is listed as a dependent. On the FAFSA, you can list up to 10 colleges and universities on the FAFSA. So for many institutions, you can go into the FAFSA right now, add 10 schools even before you submit an application for admissions, because most schools will not know if a FAFSA is submitted. There are some schools that what you call need aware, so they will look at the FAFSA before submitting it. Sometimes those are schools that require what they call the CSS profile, which we'll talk about in a little bit what that is. But you can put up to 10 schools on the FAFSA right now, submit it even before you hear back with admissions. But here's a big question we always get. Well, I'm looking at 12 schools, all right? So what you want to do is you want to submit the FAFSA for the 10 schools, confirm that went through, go back to the FAFSA. You want to edit your FAFSA, take off those schools, and then add the other schools that you wish to have the FAFSA sent. Because once you submit that FAFSA, it is sent directly to the school. So you can go back and edit that FAFSA at any point in time with other institutions that you need to add. When you do the IRS data retrieval tool, there are certain questions that they're going to ask you that may not apply, but it's going to require a numerical value. When that happens, you want to make sure you put 0. You have to put 0 for anything that requires a number. Once that FAFSA is submitted, and this is something that's important because I can't tell you how many times I get a question where I would have a family member that said, oh, we submitted the FAFSA today, can you see it? we cannot see a FAFSA within 3 to 5 days. All right. There's nothing we can do. It's an access from the government website. So if you submit it on a Monday, don't call that institution and say, I need to know whether you've got it. Going back to what I said earlier, some schools will not even be able to pull it up or be able to see it unless a decision of admission is made. So Western New England is a good example where we have no clue whether the FAFSA is in until we offer acceptance. But still, like I said, take the time, go ahead and submit it, but be patient because it does take a little bit of time. Because I've had students who submit the FAFSA in April, and then all of a sudden there was a delay and May 1st comes around. You don't want to miss that May 1st deposit deadline for many schools. So just keep that in mind. It does take a little bit of time for colleges to pull that FAFSA from the website. Now, frequent FAFSA errors. So this is what we normally see from schools. And this is where when there is some kind of error or some kind of abnormality when they're looking at the FAFSA, is usually where they do a data verification. So the common one, the most common one is the social security number, all right? Either the wrong social security number has been put in. I've had situations where mom or dad put their social security number in for this. It's all about the student, all right? So make sure the social security number is on the FAFSA and on your college application, that is the correct one. Usually there's a divorced, widow, remarried parent information. And usually the way this works is like the remarried. So let's say mom and dad are divorced, dad has primary custodianship, mom's not in the picture, dad remarried. Unfortunately, you do have to bring the step parent information in. It's just one, sometimes I don't find it fair, but colleges will have to bring that in consideration. Now with the CSS profile, there's more information that usually comes into play, but sometimes that happens because there is a way to determine whether or not there's a parent that remarried based on the tax information. So because if you file tax information and you're remarried and you're filing jointly, that's going to include that information in there. Or we've had situations where the FAFSA was submitted, but then the tax information wasn't quite what it's supposed to be. And it could be because there was either unfortunate death of one of the parents, or there was a divorce situation. Now, what we normally see, and this could have happened where 2020 family members were married, 2021, there was, God forbid, a death in the family or a divorce situation. And this is where you would have to provide documentation. This is where that judgment form can come in. So if you can show there was a decrease in income from 2021 compared to 2020, you can always approach the institutions to see if there's a judgment that can be done. There's no guarantee that additional aid will be awarded, but I've seen situations where it was the case where additional aid or even a small amount of aid was able to be awarded. Income earned by parents, step parents, we talked about it earlier. Sometimes you have that step parent that makes a lot of money, but they're not contributing to the institute to the fund because it's their significant other, their partner's son or daughter that's going. I've seen that happen. Untaxed income. So if you have a divorce situation and one parent's getting alimony or child support, you have to report that on the FAFSA. 529 plans, which are those educational funds where you can invest. Sage Scholars is a good example of that. You have to report that on the FAFSA, and the government requires you to do that. Income taxes, not taxes paid. Many times we've seen situations where it's just entered incorrectly. So we have some that decide not to do the data retrieval tool, and then all of a sudden they put down that the son or daughter makes over $1 million, and then usually that doesn't look right. So it has happened once where we've had a student that owned their own business, and that was the case. But usually that raises a red flag, and that's where they usually will do a data verification. Household size. So this is where if you have more than one in your household, if you have a family of 4 or 5 and they're all under the same household, you want to make sure you report that. There's been cases where if there was a remarry situation and you went from 2 in the household to 5, that's all something that would raise a red flag when it comes to the data, when it comes to the FAFSA. Number of members in college. So the one mistake we have is if you have one son or daughter in college and this is your second, you want to make sure you put 2. You're not just putting 1. So it's going to be who's in college at the same time as the person you're filling out the FAFSA. So if you have a senior in college and a senior in high school, then you're technically going to put 1 because they're going to be graduating by the time you're in school. So that number in college is going to be important. Real estate and investment worth. So if you have a summer home, if you have rental property, that has to be reported. All right. And I've had cases where I've had parents call me up and said, we don't make this amount of money. I don't know where the government's coming up with it. I would actually tell the family, I'm like, well, where is little Johnny? Like, oh, we sent him on a skiing trip in Salt Lake City. Well, that's something that the government usually likes to look at, which means they had a rental property within Salt Lake City. So you really want to make sure everything is reported and that you're clear, because the one thing you always want to do is you want to get the most accurate financial aid package possible. When you get an estimated package, they call it an estimate for a reason, because it can change based on any information that they're going to request following, which is where you get the data verification. Getting the data verification is not a bad thing. It's just they needed more information to make sure what they're awarding you is correct. All right. And like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. I'm more than happy to answer it. Now, here's where the understanding, and this is where it's like the nitty gritty of getting a clear understanding of what your financial aid award letter means. All right. Now, every single college or university out there, anytime a family applies with the FAFSA form, you're automatically given the standard regulation, the federal loans of $5,500 per year, all right? That's usually broken down between direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans, all right? And what's the difference between the two? And the way I always like to say is subsidized is where the interest rates accrue after you graduate. Unsubsidized loans is where the interest accrues while you're in school, all right? So I always like to say unsub is unfavorable. All right, because usually you want more of the subsidized. You don't want those interest rates to grow, but it's a mix. Like you can't just request subsidized. It's what the federal government is giving you based on your expected family contribution, the breakdown. So normally what we normally see is students always get the $2,000 direct subsidized and $3,500 unsub. All right, usually more unsub is awarded based on if that expected family contribution is high. All right. The interest rates are low. Last time I checked, they were at 2.5%. I don't know if they're actually low. The pandemic has really fluctuated the interest rates. But also keep in mind with certain programs that your son or daughter or students or that you may be looking at, there are loan forgiveness programs. So usually it's in the field of education. If you're working as a police officer or you're going into the military, there are these loan forgiveness programs. However, the majority of them are based on the federal loans. It's not based on the private loans. All right. There's a lot of private loans that will not be under the loan forgiveness. There are some, but not many. Not many. It's all based on the federal loans, which also includes like the Parent Plus loan and so forth. Now, payment doesn't start until 6 months after you graduate college. All right. If you all of a sudden, like 2 months after graduating college, you go on to graduate school, you can put your loans in deferment. All right. So these are some of the things I always like families to be aware of. Pell Grant is awarded by the government based on your expected family contribution. I forget the exact cutoff, but I know it's probably, I think it's less than $6,100 that if that's where your expected family contribution comes out. So let's say you have an EFC of 0, then you get full Pell Grant, which is usually around like a little over $6,300. So that's what the government's awarding based on your expected family contribution. And that's why more private schools tend to award the Pell Grant over some public institutions, because they can meet a higher percent of need. And this is where between merit-based scholarships, need-based scholarships, the Pell Grant, external scholarships, where private institutions can be very affordable. But you may see that if you have less than that $6,000 on your expected family contribution, you will see some kind of Pell Grant that would be awarded by the government. For Massachusetts alone, there's Massachusetts state grants. They go up as high as $1,800. This is all based on your expected family contribution as well. So really, ideally, I've had students who've received the loans, the Pell Grant, the state grant, a merit scholarship, and even a need-based scholarship. But it's all based on, many schools base it on their academics. So they have what they call financial aid leveraging. And every school is different. Some schools have many grids, some just have straightforward like 4 grids, but they really take in consideration your expected family contribution as well as your academic background too. So a student who has high academics, a high need, so like a low expected family contribution, will potentially have a higher percent need met compared to a student that might have a high need but low academics, because that's the institution saying, you know what, if I have a high academic, I'm going to take a little bit more of a risk and award a little bit more aid to that student, because the student who might be a little bit on the lower end academically will have a less of a chance to retain. Now, there are institutions out there that meet 100% need, all right? So you're going to see this with a lot of the very selective schools. So if you apply to one of these institutions and they meet 100% need, they're going to could cover anywhere from full tuition, half tuition. It all depends on your expected family contribution. But if you have an EFC of 0, they could meet full need. All right, so don't shy away from some of those schools. Now, some institutions that are comparable, especially around here, only meet a certain percent need. And that percent need all depends on that grid, that financial aid leveraging that we were talking about. Merit-based scholarships versus need-based scholarships. So merit-based scholarships are strictly based on the academic performance. This is usually offered at the time of admissions. For many and most institutions, financial aid is not brought in consideration. So how you're doing at Hampton Charter can determine how much merit this institution is going to award. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, and I'm stressing this, all right? This is something you have to hear. Every merit scholarship that is awarded by schools is different. There is no cookie cutter approach. Now, every single school will award the same amount, and how much they award depends too. I can't tell you how many times where I've had students go to me like, all right, you awarded me $24,000, but this other school gave me $30,000. So if you give me $6,000 more, I'll come to your institution. I'm like, yeah, it doesn't work like that, because that institution also costs $10,000 more than we do. So now when you look at the end, we're actually less when you factor in the total cost. So just because one school offered you more doesn't necessarily mean every single school is going to be offering the same amount. You have to look at that total cost. You have to look at what the tuition and fees, as well as room and board, and then start deducting it from that amount. There are other merit-based scholarships that a lot of schools will also award. There could be an early action scholarship. There could be a visitation scholarship. There are some schools that actually have specialized scholarships for alumni. Some will have it like some schools, like, for example, I'm just using that. I'm not sure if any of the schools here in Springfield do, but like they could have what they call a Springfield Promise or a Springfield Grant. So if you're a student from the Springfield area, like you could be awarded a grant from that way. So there's many, many different types of merit-based type of scholarships that could be awarded. All right. And same thing, one school could award it, but doesn't necessarily mean another school will. But those are all merit-based. Now, does it have some kind of direct correlation with financial aid? So when financial aid is awarded, they look at what they call a total budget. And I'm going to go over this too, but I might as well, I tend to skip around, but I'm on a roll. They have a total budget where it includes direct costs and indirect costs. So that's what they use based to package you. So those indirect costs are tuition, fees, room and board. Indirect costs is what I like to call variable costs. So that's travel, books, expenses. So that's where you're basically packaged on, and merit scholarships are incorporated in there. So if you have, say, an expected family contribution of $10,000, the school costs $50,000 with all the direct and indirect costs, but you're awarded $20,000. Now that's less financial aid you're going to get on the back end. So if you got less merit money up front, it could mean you could get more financial aid on the back end. So even if a school didn't give you that much merit-based aid up front, it means you could get stuff on the back end between need-based scholarships. So the need-based scholarships are all the scholarships, grants, and loans based on that FAFSA. So based on what you reported on the free application for federal student aid. That's the big difference. So merit scholarships still play a role. And the biggest thing is you really want to make sure you get as much merit-based, because usually those merit-based scholarships for many colleges and universities are usually per year. Normally you have to meet certain academic requirements. So, but the need-based scholarships, that can change every year, because every year you have to submit the FAFSA. And if your income changes, then that can change your FAFSA. Now, when I say change, it would have to be a drastic change. So I can tell you most institutions, like if you apply to Western New England and you're awarded a really solid financial aid package your freshman year, and then also by junior year, you win the lottery, well, then you're not going to get a big financial aid package because you won the lottery. So you just got this influx of income. Not only that, we would ask you to donate to the school too, just putting that out there. So, but that's the biggest difference between merit-based. So you want to get as much merit-based data as possible. So this way you can utilize, because if you have an expected family contribution of say $25,000 and you're commuting, but you get a $24,000 merit or like a $25,000 merit, then anything else on the financial aid would probably be loans, but it still lowers down the total cost. So you really want to make sure you get more on the merit base. Work study awards. So this is going to be a question that you're going to get on the FAFSA. And I recommend every single student, every single family to check yes. All right. Even if you decide not to work on campus your first year, that's fine. I wouldn't recommend it because usually if you don't, you end up losing the following year. But the work study award, the max that the government will award is $2,400 max for every institution. And it's basically the government saying, hey, we're going to pay for you to work on campus. All right. Now, normally these hours are not a lot. Some schools only require you to do 3 to 4 hours. Some may be 10 hours. It really depends on the job. It depends on that institution. They all have their own rules. They all have their own policies. But having that work study is great because that either can apply to your tuition. You can use it for spending money. But also having a job on campus exposes you to other students, faculty, and staff. So it's a great opportunity to network. You might be sitting here saying, well, I really want to focus on my academics and I don't know if I want to have a job on campus. I can tell you right now, regardless if you commute to an institution or you live on campus, you are going to have time. The classes are different. You could have 3 classes on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8, 9, and 10 and be done by 11. Well, what are you going to do? You're not going to study from 11 to midnight. So you're going to get involved and you're going to actually have a work study job. So I always recommend every single family to do it. Now, the other thing though, is when you get your financial aid package and you're looking at the total cost and you're deducting all this aid to figure out how much you're going to be paying for the full year, do not incorporate the work study in there. All right. I always tell families because you're not guaranteed it. You have to work for it. You may not earn all the money. Most school students end up using it for spending money anyway. All right. So don't incorporate that because it's not guaranteed money. It's not guaranteed money. So that's what you're going to see. You're going to see all the merit-based scholarship. You're going to see all the need-based scholarships that an institution's awarding. They're going to show all the grants, so whether it's Pell Grant, state grant, and then it's going to show the federal loans. And that's how your package is going to be separated. Some schools do an amazing job really explaining it. Some schools I've looked at, I'm like, I can't even figure out how much they're paying because it's all over the place. So, but schools are working on it. But it's definitely something you really want to get a clear understanding so you have a better idea, like, all right, these are what the loans mean, the loans I have to pay back, here's the grants, the mass grant, the grants you do not need to pay back, work study, merit-based and need-based. So the financial, so when you hear schools that say when you get your financial aid package, it may say when you receive your award letter, that's the financial aid package. So it's some schools use award letters, some use financial aid package. We talked about the percent need met. So some schools may meet 50%, 70%, 80%, some may meet 100%. It varies from school to school, all right? The Parent Plus loan is a loan by the federal government that students can apply for with the parents' cosign. But it's basically taking it out under the parent's name. And normally with institutions, with schools, you can take out a Parent Plus loan to cover the entire cost for the year. Some will always say, like, you know what, let me figure out how much I can pay per month, and then I'll take out a Parent Plus loan to cover the difference. But what happens if you're denied? Let's say your credit's not strong and you're denied. If you apply for the Parent Plus loan, you're denied, most institutions will add unsubsidized loan, anywhere from $3,000 to $4,000. It depends on the school, but that could end up adding unsubsidized loans on there if you get denied for the Parent Plus loan. You can also look at private funding, all right? So you can look at private loans for Sallie Mae, Citizens. Those are some examples of the private companies. You can also look at MIFA. It's strictly only from Massachusetts. I usually like MIFA compared to the others just because their loans are fixed compared to some of the private loans. They're variable. I mean, my wife has Sallie Mae and then she was close to paying it off and then all of a sudden the interest rate jumped up. So MIFA is usually the one I recommend, but there's so many loan companies out there. Just make sure you do your research and you're finding the right loan for yourself as far as like how the payment plan, what the interest rates look like and everything else. Most students borrow, all right? I know that the idea is maybe to come out here with no student debt, but there will always be some kind of student debt. And student debt is not bad debt. It's good debt because you get to claim it on taxes. Yes, it can be a pain to pay off. But at the same time, I always tell families, if you come out $80,000 to $100,000 in debt, then don't look at the institute. I even turned away students and told them, like, are you ready to pay $1,500 a month? And like, no. I'm like, this is why we're having the conversation now, unless you're looking to borrow, but try not to borrow too much. It's still going back to saying, how much can you afford per month and then finance the difference. The other big thing, external scholarships apply for everything and anything. If there's any of these students here that were at my presentation, I mentioned this at Hampton Charter last week, the Community Foundation of Western Massachusetts. So I think it's even communityfoundation.org. Highly, highly recommend it. So the application will open up January 1st of student senior year. and I'm recommending this whether you apply to any school out there, whether it's in Massachusetts or outside the state. They offer so much money in scholarships, and much of it goes unused because no one applies for it. All right. All you have to do is fill out one application and it puts your name into a bunch of different scholarships. That's all you need to do. All right. But not only that, I always recommend apply for everything and anything, because you never know if you're going to qualify. Look at Big Y, look at national brands like Gatorade, Taco Bell. They offer scholarships. Look at where mom and dad work. If we have any parents that were in the military, look at the various GI Bills that you may qualify for. Some of them could be the yellow ribbon program where it could cover full tuition. So this is all this stuff. And now's the time where you want to do that research, and your school counseling department has a list of scholarships. All right. If you see a scholarship and you're like, you know what, I don't know if I'm going to qualify for that, apply for it. What's the worst they're going to tell you is no. And I use this example at the school, but if you have a scholarship for a left-handed violin player and you're right-handed, or you play the cello, apply for it. All right. I know there was a scholarship in Westfield that a law firm was offering, and they were offering $5,000 scholarships to anyone interested in engineering because there was a whole idea of patents. They had one application and it was a business major. So what they did, they awarded it to that student because they have that social responsibility to award those scholarships. So if you see it 500, the other thing is a lot of students won't apply for scholarships. Well, it's only $500. If you apply to $5,500 ones and you get 10 of them, that's $5,000 right there. That's going to help. Even $500 can cover for books. Okay. So you really want to apply for everything and anything, even if you don't think you're going to qualify. And don't be afraid to write those essays. I get so many students who say, well, I didn't want to apply for that because I had to write an essay. Well, guess what? That's the same mindset that majority of students are having. So that may give you a better chance to be awarded that scholarship. So do not shy away from applying to as many scholarships as possible. And there's literally scholarships out there for everything. I'm a twin, and there's a scholarship out there for twins. All right. I have a student who has the albino condition. There is a scholarship for anyone who has albino condition. If a parent had heart disease, there's scholarships out there by the American Heart Foundation that they award scholarships. I mean, I'm telling you, there is scholarships out there for everything that you can possibly imagine. So, but it takes time, it takes research, and all of you have the advantage right now. All right, you have the advantage right now because now is the time where you can start looking. All right, it's really where you can start looking. All right. All right. So here's what we were talking about earlier, and this is where I want to make it clear. So you have the total budget amount that college and universities use to package you, but that's not necessarily what the final cost is going to be. Your final cost is what you get billed is the direct cost. So that's going to be the tuition, fees, which the fees are technology fees, student activities fees. So be aware because those are incorporated. I do know the big difference is state schools, the fees will be higher than tuition, whereas private schools, the tuition is going to be higher than the fees. All right. So just keep in mind, those fees are incorporated. So when you have some schools that said this is a tuition-based scholarship, like the John and Abigail Scholarship, which is only good for state institutions, that's only covering tuition. It's not covering fees. So you really want to make sure that you're doing that research. So it's tuition, fees, room is where you stay on campus, board is the meal plan. All right. Some schools require a meal plan. Some will give you an option. That's what you get billed. And the variable costs are the travel, books, supplies, personal expense. That's just incorporated. So someone who would travel, like someone from, let's say we have someone from Hampton Charter, so the Chicopee area, let's just say, and your expected family contribution is the same compared to a student in California. For most institutions, the student from California will get a little bit more because their traveling expenses are going to be higher. So that's all taking into consideration. It's not much of a difference, but most financial aid offices will look at that. But that's where I want to make sure that I get a lot of families that say, well, this school told me it's going to cost $60,000, but I see on the financial aid, it says total cost 67. That's because they have the direct and indirect costs in there. So you just want to make sure you subtract all your financial. This is where some schools don't do the best job, where you want to make sure you look at what the total package that you receive. So merit-based, need-based aid, and deduct that from the direct cost. That will give you what the total cost will be. We're almost done there. All right. This is not corporate. All right. So potential additional costs. So I get from a lot of families, and I always try to educate them too, that there's always the additional cost that's going to be outside the direct cost that you may not be aware of. If some schools allow you to bring a car on campus, there's going to be potentially a charge for a parking permit. There are some institutions that don't charge, but I know like there's a school in California that charges $1,500 a semester. Some will charge $100 for the year, but there could be that additional cost for bringing a car on campus. Some schools may require a laptop. Now, what they're not telling you, they say, oh, we'll give you a laptop. That laptop is usually incorporated within the total cost. So it's usually incorporated in the tuition, or you may have to go out and buy a new laptop in order to uphold, to get the memory or get the type of gigabytes where certain programs may have to be uploaded onto your computer. So that may be an additional expense that you didn't expect, that you're like, you know what, I really think you need to have a laptop when you go off to college. Some scholarship money, what's nice is some of the external scholarships, they could end up sending you the check and say, oh, you got $1,000 scholarship, here's the check, where you don't have to give it to the institution, or it doesn't have to be direct mailed to the institution. And I've had students, I'm like, just cash and use it either for your tuition or buy a new laptop or buy something that you're going to need for school, and or even use it for books. There are payment plans that many colleges will have. Some payment plans you might have to do an additional $25, $50, or $75 fee to set up this payment plan. So I always like to mention this because this actually caught me by surprise when I was looking at college and universities. I didn't know there was a cost to set up a payment plan, but you want to make sure you pay attention. Lab fees, usually lab fees are incorporated within the total cost, but if you are someone interested in a science related major, you're going to have the additional lab fees attached onto the tuition. Sometimes these cost a minimum, but I always like to have families be aware, because you could see that extra charge on the bill and be like, where did this come from? Bus train passes. So if you're going into like Boston or New York City or Philadelphia or Baltimore, where you don't need a car, but you have to take transportation because maybe the campus is spread out and you don't want to walk 10 blocks. There could be that additional cost of a bus or a train ticket. Health insurance. So by Massachusetts law, every single student has to have health insurance. Some states are similar. There's ways that some states you can waive the health insurance, but if your health insurance does not meet the minimum requirements for that state, then you may be required to take their health insurance, which that can range anywhere from an additional $2,000 to $3,000. So that's something you really want to make sure you take in consideration, because that could be an additional charge that right now everything looks good, and then all of a sudden, boom, you get $2,000 to $3,000 charge. For many of these schools, when you have to set up a waiver, you have to do it every year. So that's something else I always like to mention. As you can see, I'm very transparent. I'm going into a lot of detail. All right, so next steps after commitment. So let's say, yes, financial aid package is great. I want to go to that institution. So what they're going to have you do is you put down your tuition deposit. In some cases, a tuition deposit and room and board. That varies from school to school. They can range anywhere from $100 to $1,000. Yes, there are some schools that do charge $1,000 just to put a deposit down, but that does count towards your tuition payments, room and board charges too. But you would have to go online and make that deposit. Once you make that deposit, then there's going to be a time in order to make the loans active. So if you decide you want to accept your financial aid award letter, because many of these schools you will have to sign and accept your financial aid award letter besides putting down the tuition deposit, then you're going to have to do an entrance counseling and a promissory note. This will actually activate the student loans. All right, so that's important. I just had a student today who came in and said, yeah, my loans haven't been applied. And I looked at his record. I'm like, you haven't done the promissory note and entrance counseling. So they don't take long to do, but it's something that needs to get done. So the entrance counseling is basically give you a better understanding what the loans are about. The promissory note saying, I'm going to pay it back after I graduate. We talk about paying the deposit and then the payment plan. So the next step, you may want to actually make a payment plan, and that usually you can set up sometime during the summer. Many institutions, the first bill will come out July 1st for many institutions, with the payment August 1st. So just be prepared, because we get some, it's like, well, I didn't think I had to make a payment until September, and they're already 2 months behind. So it's different. Like I said, it depends on the school, but I don't want any of you to get blindsided and all of a sudden realize that you have your first payment that you have to make in the month of July. Additional information. So this is something, so the FAFSA form versus the CSS profile. So the FAFSA form, every single school pretty much accepts. Some schools may require the CSS profile. So it requires both forms. Now, the CSS profile is owned by the College Board. I think it's a little bit more intrusive, and I'm not going to lie, from my understanding, it's a pain to fill out. They will ask for a lot of information. Even if there's a divorced parent, remarried parent, they will ask for all that information. I always like to joke around and say they're going to ask for your mother's, roommates, sisters, cousin. Like, they really do go nitty and gritty, and it takes a little while to fill out. There's also a charge for the CSS profile. So I think it's like $80 right now to fill out that profile. So you may have a school that says, yes, we accept the FAFSA, but we also require the CSS profile. The way I approach it says, we're not going to ask you for Western New England, we don't have you pay money until you're going to get less money, because usually that's the result. Usually it results in students getting a little bit less aid. Professional judgments we talked about. So if your finances in 2021 is completely different than 2020, you can always ask the school for a professional judgment. They're going to ask you for your 2021 taxes, and maybe some additional information too. Appeals for negotiation. I can't stress this enough. Do not call a school and negotiate. It will not happen. All right. Don't go and say the school gave me this amount. If you give me that, it doesn't work. But schools will have appeal processes. Schools do not advertise it. We don't advertise it, but I work with students and I can see maybe an extra 1,000 or 2,000 could make a difference. We can tell them, hey, go through the appeal process. This does not guarantee, for any school out there, does not guarantee that's going to give you additional aid. But it goes back. You have nothing to lose. The worst they're going to tell you is, no, unfortunately, we can't do anything additional. So make sure if you're looking at it, you're like, I can't do this, I need a little bit more, contact the school and see if they have an appeal process. They'll give you the steps. They may tell you no, but majority of schools I know that we overlap with, they do have some kind of appeal process. Merit scholarship calculators, many schools have this. Just go on the website, give it an estimate of what your merit-based scholarship may be. And I say maybe because some schools do recalculate, which means the GPA in your transcript may be different than what they calculate. So that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get that exact amount. It's just going to give you a ballpark, an estimate. The net price calculator, or what you hear with the true cost calculator, by law, every single college and university has to have it on this website. Now, some bury it in the website. They get away with it, but it's on their website. So you could probably just Google, search it in the school's website. Me personally, I don't think the net price calculator is as accurate as it should be. I always say that will give you worst case scenario, because I have situations where families are like, well, I'm not getting anything. They file the FAFSA and they actually do get something additional. So I would say that's like worst case scenario. And then mailing dates of financial aid awards will vary. Some schools, if you're applying early decision, may give you your financial aid award at the time you receive your early decision letter. Some will mail them out in December. Some schools are still at February, March timeline. So in the end, unless you're applying early decision, any other decision, you still do not need to let that institution know until May 1st, whether or not you're going to be attending. All right. So it still gives you time to work out the finances, compare your packages. All right. Because when we talk about best fit, financially is part of that. All right. If one school is costing more than another, and that's your first choice, then you need to look, is it worth the investment? Is this school giving me the opportunities that I need to be successful compared to the school that may cost less? Because sometimes going less doesn't mean it's the best option. I mean, I have a lot of students who went to another institution because it cost a lot less, and then they come back to us saying, I made a mistake, because they're not getting the experience that they were hoping at that institution because it costs less. All right. Sometimes if it costs less, it still may be the best option. But like I said, just look at your overall budget, look at what you're able to afford as a family. If some schools cost more, just look at it as investment, look at it as whether it's not something that you feel like you can work. So, but overall, I made it less than under an hour, barely by 9 minutes. So I wasn't sure if there's any families that have any questions. If not, this is recorded, so we can definitely, I'm going to share this with the school counseling department so they have it. But is there any questions I may have? If not, I really, really do appreciate you guys joining us. And I do have someone that raised their hand. And Mimi, you have your hand.
Yeah, I did. Thank you. Really good job. The true cost calculator.
Yep.
Yeah. Now you're saying that's supposed to be on every school's website?
Every college and university by law has to have it on. They said that was about 4 or 5 years ago. Like,
okay.
I've gone on schools' websites, try to search for it, and it would take a while because they really don't want you to find it. Some schools have it, boom, right on front. So it varies from school to school. Ours is not bad to find, but I'm not a big fan of it because I really just don't think it gives you the realistic approach of what the financial aid package is going to be like.
Okay. Does it work the other way? Is there like one place with the true cost calculator website where it lists all the schools? Does it work that way?
No, because it's based on by school. Yeah, it's just based on by school. Because what a lot of these calculators, many schools have do it internally where they work on this calculator. Some actually contracted out where they hire
Mhm.
a firm to build the calculator because it's very complex, the coding and everything else that takes place.
Okay.
But yeah, it's going to be different for every single school.
Yeah, I was just looking at my daughter's number one choice while you were doing this, and just reading, trying to make heads or tails of the costs. And I'm pretty smart. It's just so confusing.
It can be
And the way
very
that
confusing.
everything's categorized and split up, and it's hard to know. Okay, anyway, thank you.
Yeah, and the only way you're really going to find out how things are going to work is just going through the process, to be honest. And that's the best, because like I said, every single family is going to be different as far as how things are going to be packaged, how things are going to be awarded, and everything else.
I had one more question.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm here all night. I'm good.
Well, I'm not going to be. I have
No,
another.
no, no.
But how far back? So when I fill out the FAFSA, are they just looking at 2020, or are they looking at previous years, or how's
So
that working?
do you have a son or daughter that's looking at fall 22?
Yes.
Only 2020.
Okay, because prior to that, it's super complicated and
Yep.
there's stuff that, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, no, and I trust me, I see it happen all the time, and it's only 2020 that they're looking at. So
Okay. All right. Thank you.
you're welcome. Yeah, and I'm going to stop the recording too, just in case if